From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
I'm honored. My name's Warren Bernard. I'm the executive director of the Small Press Expo, and I'm honored to have been asked to do this. Normally, these introductions done by Library of Congress people. And we have, the Small Press Expo has an extensive relationship with Library of Congress, not only being a sponsor, but also we have the Aspect Collection at the Library of Congress where we collect the kinds of independent comics that Jaime and Gilbert do. So that's me. Now Gilbert, how can I explain Gilbert? Gilbert and Jaime together, they basically changed the face of what we know now as comics. 30 years ago, when they were first starting to do their work independently in Oxnard, California, they were writing about things that were very adult. They were writing about things that were more in the human condition than you were seeing at that time. Today it's, you know, everybody is doing a lot of what they blazed the path for. Gilbert and Jaime, they write on separate paths, but they also write together. Gilbert's path led him down his 20-year saga of Palomar, which is sort of a mythic community in Southern California with all of the people that the Hernandez brothers went ahead and grew up with. Gilbert has been a winner of multiple Harvey Awards, Ignatz Awards, and just the other day, he was announced to be the Penn Center USA. He won the Graphic Literature Award, and he will be presented that a little later in the year, and that takes place in Beverly Hills. So it's my honor to go ahead and present Gilbert Hernandez.
So here I am for 40 minutes to talk about myself. Well, Warren stole most of my stuff already, so I'll just elaborate on it. You know, I grew up in a house of, there were 6 of us, you know, 5 brothers and a little sister, and I woke up one day and there was a comic books in the house, right? I didn't get, the backstory is that our mom liked comic books when she, you know, in the 40s, you know, when she was reading, you know, whatever was around in the 40s. There were so many comic books then, but she gravitated toward, this is what she told us later, she gravitated toward certain comics that turned out to be actually very, very good, influential comics. She just had an eye for what was a better comic book, because history has proven these were better comic books. On the top of the list would be like Will Eisner's The Spirit, and C.C. Beck's Captain Marvel, and Carl Barks' Donald Duck. Now, looking back at the history of comics, those are great, influential comics. So, time passes, she gets married, has a son named Mario, and he starts to read comic books because she allows him to. She thinks this is okay because I read comic books as a kid, so it's okay. So, 4 years later, I come along. Now, the comic books are already in the house, so you know, I turned my head, there's a comic book. It was encouraged because it kept us quiet. You know, Dad is like, you know, give him a comic book and he'll get quiet. And sure enough, we would. And then another brother is born, Richard, and then another guy named Jaime showed up. Now he was the mystery. He was a little smaller than the rest of us, and he was a little more quiet. Little did I know what was bubbling up in his head, you know, that he would, you know, like, pretty much take over comic books in his own way. But anyway, we read comic books and we copied from them because, like I said, that kept us quiet. Because you know, 5 boys, and then there's other siblings after Jaime, and you know, we just read comics and drew them all the time, and you know, just out of fun, basically. And you know, Mom encouraged it, and she liked comics, and so, and luckily the timing is great. We grew up in the 60s where the boom of comic books, the modern comic books happened. The Marvel comics book started, and DC had to compete with Marvel, and they had to make better and better comics, or at least crazier comics. And comics, it was a really crazy time, fertile time, because the writing started to get better. The art was always good in comic books, but the writing got better, so that it was combined to create new things. Then the underground comics came in the late 60s, which was, for me, very inspirational, because they were naughty. You know, they were dirty, acid trip pot comics, and and I was at that age where it was very naughty and I had to hide it from mom, and but those comics inspired me as well, mostly about the freedom, not necessarily the gross out aspects of them, but it was the freedom of simply tackling issues like just satire, humor, violence, sex. But that was put by the wayside because I was still reading Spider-Man comics and learning from the mainstream comics. And I kept drawing Jaime and I both kept drawing comic books for our own amusement. But we found that it wasn't so easy to approximate what was going on in comic books already. Like, say, we would do drawings at school, I would do drawings at school, and they would say, you should draw for Marvel Comics, you should draw Spider-Man comics. And that was the last thing I wanted to do. Partly because I was a snob, I didn't feel like drawing New York and Spider-Man and that kind of stuff. I thought I had my own vision. And the other half was like, I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to work really hard to approximate the look and feel of a Spider-Man comic. So I basically just used the bare bones of what those comic books were, the actual storytelling, the way they drew people and expressing the people, how they were expressed in the stories that way. But I wasn't interested in the subject of Spider-Man so much. So, and also we read a lot of comic books for kids in the 60s. And there's a few artists from the 1960s who drew comics for kids who were extremely influential with us because they were just so damn good. They just happened to fall in the kid category. A couple of artists for Archie Comics, Dan DeCarlo and Harry Lucy, to name one. An artist that did Dennis the Menace comics, a licensed comic of all things, was an artist named Owen Fitzgerald. And what he was an animator who became a comic book artist. In general, he did like just goofy comics like Bob Hope comics and Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis comics. And his style was very good, but it was very rushed. He just it was mostly layouts and well-told stories that way. But when he was hired to do Dennis the Menace, he had the knack of copying Hank Ketchum's style from the Dennis the Menace comic strips. And it unleashed something in him that he was able to tell a story so well, just using the simplest drawing, this character. I've never seen more vivid drawings of real life people except for the Dennis the Menace comics, because this artist was so good. When we were kids looking at that stuff, we just thought it was just comics we liked. It was good. But we kept going back to him, and even as adults, we thought this guy was really good. And Jaime and I really have, focused on this artist as this is the guy who nailed drawing people in a simplistic way. I mean, of course, there was Peanuts, which was a great comic strip, and it was drawn just right, for what it was. But the artist doing these Dennis Menace comics, he was able to use body language that he learned from animation. So that really, really informed the way we wanted to draw people on the page, more so than a superhero pose or, guy gritting his teeth, reading the newspaper. We thought it was more interesting if he was leaning back reading the newspaper. Other artists did that as well, but this guy, Owen Fitzgerald, really nailed it. So it's time to have a life. I grow up and I don't feel like having a regular job. I want to draw comics, but there was nothing at the time. There was no I could just jump into doing comics and make a living doing that, because half of this was about making a living. So Jaime and I, just out of happenstance, we're at the right age, and we're hanging out in the punk scene in LA. This is the late 70s, and it influenced our attitude a lot about the DIY thing, like just do it yourself. Don't worry about what other people want. Do it for yourself and do it your way. So luckily we had the skill and the practice of drawing already, so it wasn't like we just started drawing the next week. We had already done comics, so we were doing them for ourselves. And our older brother Mario, said we had an opportunity to publish our own comic. So this is where the first issue of Love and Rockets came out. I came up with the title just because I wanted a cool title, kind of a retro title, but at the same time, something new. And we wanted to use the elements of stuff we had learned from old comic books we read. We did a little bit of superheroes, a little bit of spaceships, a little bit of aliens, just because it was fun to do. But the artists that we liked from the past kept creeping back to us, like the Peanuts comic strips or the Dennis the Menace comic books and the Archie comic books. They're more about, more or less, at least to our eyes, life in general. And to be able to infuse those influences into the way we were drawing, we were able to come up with a new kind of comic, which was actually an old comic. We're actually bringing the past and bringing it to the forefront to tell our stories, yet at the time, since there wasn't a lot of alternative comics, not a lot, barely, ones here and there. There was, the undergrounds had waned. There was just mostly focused on Marvel and DC comics, the superhero comics at the time. This is early 80s. There was just not a lot going on, so we just winged it. We just thought, well, we'll just use our punk attitude, our DIY feelings about creating, and we'll make a comic book with that. We had no idea that that's what people were waiting for. There was no plan, we just wanted to do a comic book of self-expression. So I sent a copy to Fantagraphics, hoping to get an easy review. They'll review our little comic book, and that'll be because we couldn't afford ads. So we thought, well, if they give a little review of it, whether they like it or not, at least it might get a little notice. Very naive of me. I had no idea that anything would happen of it. Here comes the timing again. Well, Gary Groff, the publisher of Fantagraphics, decided, we'd like to publish his book. Would you guys make it the book? We'll publish it. You guys continue the book. Okay, let's just do it. So Love and Rockets just basically started like that. Very simply, just we're doing the comic books we want to. And luckily, the response was immediate. They were gravitated toward the art, mostly Jaime's, because he's such a skilled artist. And luckily, that's what caught the eye of people. They liked the covers, the way the covers looked, the way he designed, the characters that he would be using to this day. And for me, I was just kind of messing around, but I didn't really have what he had already. Jaime had already established where he wanted to go, and he was moving slowly toward that way, more and more into day-to-day lives of his characters. And I really wasn't doing that yet. I was still messing around with science fiction and goofy imagery. And it came to the third issue of Love and Rockets. It was getting such good response, and I had half the book to finish because Jaime had the other half, and I just thought, why don't I just throw something in there that I feel like doing that it's more important than just goofing around with science fiction and robots and monsters and stuff? Why don't I just tell my story because I have the opportunity to? So I started thinking about different things I wanted to do, and that's when I came up with Palomar. It's a fictional Latin American town. It's all about magic realism. The most important thing to me was the interaction of the characters, but I still wanted the magic realism in it. I wanted, now and again, you'll have a ghost story. Now and again, you'll have, a mystery. Are there UFOs? Are this? But try to take it from a point of view of us, of regular people. And to make it interesting, I would continue to do that. I didn't expect to continue it. I thought I would just do this one story. It was done in 2 parts. And the response for that, for me, was my first time people took me seriously. It was like, do more of that. You're going to do more of that. And I was like, oops, that was a one-time deal. So look, I didn't want to continue the characters as they were. As I left them at the first end of the first story. So I decided to jump into the future about 5 or so years to age the characters and then go from there and do the story of these characters. Well, that worked for us, and that worked for me. So it got to a point where I could do anything in a Palomar story that I wanted to. It got a little crazy after a while. Lots of violence and sex, which is always good. But after a while, you start moving away from the characters. About I want the characters to feel real. I want the readers to relate to them. And when you start to get into a little more toward fantastic stuff and a little more aggressive stuff, you start to get away from that. So that's when I started planning, well, maybe I should do separate graphic novels, because I do like to do lurid pulp stories. And I was putting too much of that in the Palomar stories. So I decided to spread it out a little bit, to make it, I have enough energy. I just happen to have enough kinetic energy to where I can do this and that and that. It wears me out, but I can do that. I don't know if I do it well, but I do it. So anyway, this is where I am now. I still do my Love and Rocket stuff, and I try to focus on the characters and the characterizations of the characters' lives as they grow older. And but then now and again I get a knack for doing a short science fiction story. Well, sometimes I don't have room in Love and Rockets for that, so I'll apply that to maybe a future graphic novel. I'll put the ideas aside, and pretty soon I'll have enough ideas to come up with maybe something that just wouldn't fit in the Palomar story, something I can just go a little nuts with. And that took a little while to master, though, because I wasn't giving 100% on all the different things I was doing. So, but now I think I've evolved and pushed myself enough to where I'm able to do that now. And so this is where my most recent book, Marble Season, comes in. I was doing pulp fiction, crime stories. I was doing naturalistic stories of characters. I was doing exaggerated stories of regular characters. I was doing all these different things. And it just came to the point where I hadn't really done a direct story about my childhood. Now, so much water was under the bridge that I've used so much of my childhood in my other comics. So I thought, when I just do a fictional, a semi-autobiographical story of my childhood and just put it into one book, and then just that'll be it, and I won't do that anymore. Well, it worked out pretty good. It's a book called Marble Season, and it's basically a semi-autobiographical story about growing up in Oxnard, California, in the early '60s, mid '60s, and I just began putting incidents of things that happened to me, things that I did, mistakes I made. But I didn't want the story to be a downer. I didn't want it to teach lessons. I didn't want it to be, about the real darker sides of childhood for so many people. I wanted to do it give the feel of that world, that twilight world of being 10 years old, where you're just 10, and the next thing you do is the next adventure. The next thing you do is the greatest thing you've ever done, or the greatest thing you've ever seen, without the baggage of the heavy, repercussions of negative things in your life. So I de-emphasized like bullying and child abuse and things like that are true for so many people. I just wanted to focus more. It was more a Valentine about looking at the past. The TV shows we watched in those days, the comic books we read, the movies we read, the celebrities, the music we heard, and how you just, the days where you feel like there's no beginning, there's no end, you're just in the middle of being 10. So the next thing you do is whatever whatever comes up, So I did a book like that, and luckily it's gotten a really good response. Let me show you what it looks like, in case anybody's interested. And this is the cover we settled on, just because it's just two kids having a fist fight. And because I remember growing up that was kind of the norm, kids getting fights, and then maybe 2 weeks later they're best friends. And I wanted to put that stuff in the book, because a lot of times that stuff is expressed in films and TV shows. It's not only sanitized, but it's in service of making the plot more interesting or whatever, and it's distorted to what my memory was. It was sort of, like I said, everything was the next day, something else happened. Something good happened, something didn't good happen, something that wasn't good happened. And but I remember an incident like that. It was two guys were having a fight. This was after school, and it was a pretty heavy fight. I'd never seen a real. I mean, usually kids were just pulling shirts and hitting each other and crying and falling down, but these guys were really going at it like they were boxers, and it was kind of frightening. But what I noticed was that the people around weren't interested in the fight so much as the new yearbook had just come out, and they're all looking at the yearbook that this girl had. She goes, look at this, look at this. And I'm seeing these two guys just smacking themselves to pieces over here. And I'm like, this doesn't match. Somehow this doesn't make sense to me. Yet that was growing up. That's what you dealt with, things like that. You just had to come up with your own ideas of what was happening, what this meant. And then I remember later, once the fight, the guys backed off and they're huffing, puffing. One of the guys pointed and goes, "Oh, don't leave. I want to look at the book when you're done." And his elbows are bleeding and his nose is bleeding. He goes, "Oh, wait, don't go because I want to see that book." And I was like, wait a minute. If I got in a fight, I'd be crying and I'd be laid up in the hospital and taking aspirin and wouldn't even and I'd be humiliated for a month. But this guy was just like, he just took it in stride. And I remember after the fight, the other guy went away. "Oh, I'll get you," and this, that. They spread it out, and the kid just came back, the guy that I knew, and he's all bleeding and stuff, and he was looking at the yearbook. He was kind of, "Who's that guy?" "Oh, your nose is bleeding." He goes, "Oh, I don't care." And he's looking like that. And then I remember, like 2 weeks later, they were like best buddies. The two guys that were fighting were hanging out. So that was a life lesson, an interesting life lesson, how the flexibility of life when you're a kid. It doesn't have to be. You don't have. Adults hold grudges. Adults don't seem to forget to be angry or being angry with somebody. They seem to hold on to these things. That's my experience anyway. So anyway, that's just a symbol of the flexibility of being a kid, where you use 1 second you're suffering the worst humiliations, faux pas, social faux pas, and then the next day you're back to doing something new, I guess because kids change, kids grow up and are flexible and change, and adults, once you're around 30, 34 years old, you stay the same. Your perception is the same. So adults become very rigid. I mean, there's probably a biological reason for that. I don't know. But so anyway, marble season's just about that time when you're 10 years old, and I don't know. That's where I am now, and I'm just doing graphic novels. I'm going back doing my next one will be a crime one. So all the good reviews and good faith I've gotten from Marble Season are going to be destroyed by sex and violence. So I'll be back to being an underdog, but that's all right. I have fun doing that stuff. But that's the thing. I will do a Pulp Fiction type crime thing that's heavily violent or with sex in it, and the next thing I'll go, oh, I feel like doing a kid story. So I use my schizophrenia for my strengths, and hopefully I can, the one thing I haven't done that I'm thinking about and I just don't know where to go from is I really want to do a story, I guess a graphic novel, for adults. And what I mean by that is just to eliminate every trapping that the pulp idiom brings, that infuses comics. A lot of my work. Even if I'll tell a story about adults, I'll throw either magic realism in it or some kind of dramatic event that's kind of over the top. So I thought, why don't I just do a story about two people talking for 120 pages? I've tried and I haven't got there yet. So I don't know, someday I'll get to it. But that's the one book I would like to do, is basically do a story for adults that everybody can read. Kind of sort of like Marble Season, but about adults, not kids. And hopefully I'll get to that someday. I don't know when. But the only reason I haven't got to it yet is only because I don't have that many ideas for it. So, because after 30 years, you use up a lot of your ideas. Luckily, Jaime and I are very lucky to continue 11 Rockets after 30 years, because most artists that are able to put out their most vital work at the most have 20 years of that, usually. And I'm talking about cartoonists. The best cartoonists will just have 20 years of their best stuff, and the rest is like, well, this stuff's not so good anymore, or whatever. Luckily, we haven't faced that yet, and we're on 30 years, so I'm crossing my eyes and fingers that we can continue doing it. But even if we do, Jaime and I have discussed this, even if we do start to falter and do a lesser work as we get older, I'm going to do it anyway. So, any questions? Yes.
I teach at an alternative school for kids who've had trouble in the regular schools, high school. And as you can imagine, I've got classes full of Latino boys, and I'm trying to get them interested in reading. And graphic novels are very popular. But of Latino author graphic novels, you guys are one of the few out there, but I can't bring your stuff into my classroom. So this is more of a request than a question. Could you do more stuff that I could bring into my classroom? And I don't mean kid stuff. I mean stuff that's going to interest high school boys and is going to appeal to them and show them that English isn't something they have to hate. That's my main goal, is to try to get them to see that English has they can use English for their own future, and it doesn't have to be something they hate, that they can identify with it too.
Well, yeah, I hear what you're saying. That's kind of like what I was going back to saying, doing a story for adults that people can read, that doesn't have too many sensational aspects. I would like to get to every book I could possibly come up with. That's obviously not going to happen, but I can do as much. I do want to go do more serious stories, not a lot, but just some, where it will have the same appeal as Marble Season for a specific age group, like she's saying, teenagers, and I was talking about adults and such. Although I have to say, I have to stick up for Marble Season. It's an all ages book, but it's about kids, but it's not for kids. It's for anybody who can read. I've had people 60 years old coming up to me with this, going, "I know what this is. I know. I can live this. I didn't write down to people,
No, I have that in my room. I just need more.
You need more. I hear
need
what you're
more.
saying. Note to self: more books without TNA. Oh, yeah. Yes.
This is like a practical artist question. So, how long did it take you to make a living? Did you have to have a day job, and was that, years, or were you able to make a living quickly from Fantagraphic sales? And part two is, do you think it's more difficult now because you mentioned having good timing when you were young and starting out, and it's definitely more people on the planet, more competition these days, and if you go to the Fantagraphic website, they basically say, please send us your work if you would like it to be thrown in the trash.
Ooh, this is a tough one. Well, it's actually coming from the co-creator of Love and Rockets. This is probably more likely what's going to be for the upcoming cartoonist. It's hard as hell to make a living doing comics. That's why I've got 2 graphic novels at once and Love and Rockets. I just happen to be fast, and I happen to, luckily, Jaime and I have built ourselves names with Love and Rockets over 30 years, so I get hired. They say, yes, I'll do your graphic novel. And I know not everybody can do that, especially young cartoonists. It's not easy. It's probably, at least for Jaime and I, even more so me, to make a living just doing Love and Rockets or one comic. I have to do a lot, and I have to be fast. If you're talking to Dan Klaus or Chris Ware or Neil Gaiman or Frank Miller, our peers, all my pals, all those guys got money. That's how they're able to continue doing what they want to do. That's Jaime and I, and me more so. I have to do stuff to just, whatever opportunity comes to me, I have to do a lot of work just to make a living. It's not. You have to really. We have to really love it, to continue, or make a lot of money like those guys. I don't want to discourage anyone, because if you really love it, you should just do it anyway. But making a living, you probably will have a day job as well as doing comics, and that's tough, because when we first started Love and Rockets, I had a day job, and I couldn't get any comics done because I was just burned out. Just like, I don't feel like drawing today, and then weeks pass. I don't want to be discouraging. Do it because you love it. Do it because it's fun. Do it because you have something to say. And if you're like Kate Beaton, you'll be a superstar overnight. Some people have the luck and the talent. She has the talent, and she has the chops to do it. It's great. I've talked to her about it. I go, Kate, what's it like being an overnight success? She goes, it's great.
I had a question. Yeah. Had you know anybody from the Gilbert School in New Jersey? That a lot of graphic novelists have come.
Do I know anybody from the Gilbert School?
Joe Gilbert had done quite a few graphic novels for adults.
I don't know much about that side of cartooning. I do like how toward the end Gilbert was pushing himself to do his own little books and stuff. He did the Jew Gangster book, which is it's actually not bad.
He did quite a few graphic novels.
Yeah, and he started pushing himself to do that, and I think that was a good a move for him. He still had the trappings of learning, doing so many mainstream comics, which didn't make his books that intense, but I think they were really well done.
There's a number of artists that have gotten started there by going.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I don't follow mainstream comics, so I can't help you there. But I'm very impressed with Joe Gilbert's career. That till the day he died, he could draw like a mother. You know?
Yeah, he could. Yeah, he was. He was my father-in-law. Actually.
Oh, there you go.
Hi, I'm thrilled to see you and your brother here today. I grew up in the punk scene here in the '80s, and a lot of the friends we had that had artistic talents ended up doing a lot of work for zines, for record covers, things like that. Did you and your brother do that? If you did, are you ever thinking of collecting it?
Well, we actually, as we're trying, developing our own comics, we would do like punk flyers and stuff, if that's what you mean, and contributed spot illustrations to the fan magazines, like the Comics Journal and the Comics Buyer's Guide. We did things, and then a couple of kid fanzines, because we just felt like drawing something, maybe even a superhero, and we would send them to these kids putting out these fanzines, mostly Marvel and DC type fans. But what was really weird in those days is that we learned the hard way that the mainstream fans of the day were very rigid in what they liked. So when we'd send them an oddball robot that I took from a 1950s movie or something, they'd look at it and go, "This is weird. Why did you draw that?" So we learned the hard way that it was very rigid in what their view of what comics were, and we weren't that at all. We were just all over the place. We wanted to just go nuts and just draw what we felt like. And I thought, like an idiot, well, if I pull from old pulpy B-movie type material, that would be cool in a fanzine. They hated it. They did not get it. They wanted whatever was contemporary, what looked exactly like now, whatever at the time. So even though they were nice kids, they helped us out. And interestingly enough, now and again we meet some of those. They're adults now and they have real jobs and stuff. And they go, "Boy, was I dumb! I rejected your drawing, and boy, am I sorry for that." I go, "Hey, you were a kid. It was no big deal. We just, So it was kind of cool."
Hello. Okay. So I like reading comics and everything, and my favorite ones are ones that have very strong female characters. They don't even have to be in the lead. I just like comics that do that. So I read your mini bio in the author's book, and I found it interesting that you actually like to make females that were very full dimensional and everything instead of just one side. So why do you think it's important to make fully dimensional female characters in comic books?
That's actually a good question, because we thought we knew that was missing in comics as we were growing up in our teens. Like I was talking about the rigidity of the 70s, where comic books became basically Marvel and DC, and that was it. Because when we grew up, there was all kinds of characters, and you saw a lot of characters, little kid comics about little girls, especially from the Harvey publishers. There was Little Dot and Little Lotta and Little Lulu, which is a great comic book to this day. And so that was the norm. But then by the 70s came around, that started to die off. It became more of the what was interesting to boys. So boys pushed the girls back, were more interested in what boys were doing. They had female characters, but they were just sort of, they just basically were guys built like women, And so that didn't really interest us. We felt, because we were interested also in films. I mean, when I was a little kid, I didn't mind that my mom was watching a Joan Crawford movie. I didn't think like, "Oh, ew, it's about a lady, yuck." No, we just thought this is a good, interesting story, or whatever, And then we would watch a horror movie or science fiction movie, and the woman is always, oh my God, the monster, and they would trip and all that stuff. It was different from the movies our mom watched. It was like, Betty Davis isn't tripping and falling. You know, she's the lead in the story, and she's yelling at everybody. And I'm like, wow, that's, you know. So anyway, unconsciously, I guess, we just infused that to our comics because that was real to us. We grew up in a house of our mom and our grandmother raising us, and our mom had a bunch of sisters, so we saw the interaction of women as people. That was the most important thing. It wasn't necessarily looking to do strong women, just to doing people. You know, so I don't really think, we never really thought about the characters. We're drawing women, of course, but as the character as a woman, we always thought of them as a character, and carrying the story or carrying the weight of part of the story. So that we just somehow had a knack for it because we just didn't have any blocks against it. So it wasn't a conscious decision. Well, one thing was a conscious decision, but most of it was simply, it just felt right. It felt like the world. In high school, I had a lot of girlfriends. Most of my friends were girls. I just gravitated toward that way. I don't know, maybe because of the growing up with mom and all her sisters and stuff. I don't know where that comes from. But the one little aspect of being conscious about doing the girls is we just love drawing them. We just love drawing pretty girls. You know, we just loved the life drawing classes of drawing the female model. We just loved it. You know, so there wasn't a point of thinking like, well, here's an attractive girl, I will make her a lesser person. There was never that thought never came. We just put the same effort we would put in a serious character into the women. So anyway, yes, we are pioneers of doing women characters, and luckily we influenced so many people to go that way, and a lot of female readers, which there wasn't a lot of from the 70s and the early 80s for comics, decided to do their own things and tell a story from a woman's perspective. Jaime and I can't do that. We can only tell it from a character's perspective. So now this is what's great. You have cartoonists and female cartoonists and writers and artists that are who are able to tell their stories their way from their experience, and that's a big boom. SPX, I think the nominations for the 5 graphic novels of the year were all by women, and this is a good trend. This is like things are just moving and opening up. That's what's great about graphic novels. That's what's great about the medium. There's nobody telling you can't do it.
Okay, well, this question kind of coincides with that. Could you talk a little bit about your inspiration for Luba and her hammer?
That comes simply from indulgence. Like I said, the old movies of I really like the cartoony aspect of say a lot of Sophia Loren's characters in movies. I don't know if you guys, her movies aren't watched that much these days, but if you watch a really good movie from Sophia Loren, especially from Italy, the Italians like to make their movies like comic strips. They might like to make them really alive and really over the top, and women with their hands on their hips and yelling at guys and throwing their shoes at them and stuff. And you didn't really see that in American movies. And in Italians, they didn't care. It was funny. And you watch those movies now, and they're really vital and really fun. So with Luba, I just kind of wanted to have that kind of character in my comics, just because I thought they were so spirited and it was just so much fun to have a woman character yelling at everybody. I don't know. It wasn't fun to be yelled at, but it was fun to create a character that way. All right, I got to go. Thanks for listening, and I wish I could do more.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.